Welcome to this program by Radboud Reflects and Maven Publishing on how minds change. So before I'm going to tell you a bit of what we're going to do tonight, I'd like to ask you a question. Suppose I firmly believe that Elvis Presley never died, but instead he just moved to live on the moon. Now imagine you really wanted to change my mind about that. What method would you use? Would you try to convince me by using the facts and presenting me with counter-evidence? Or would you rather listen to me and let me talk? So let me see a quick show of hands. Who would say, I'd present some facts? That's quite a lot. Yeah, I think it's a little more than half. Okay, so who'd say, I'd rather listen and let you talk? Oh, that's a lot more, actually. Interesting. Okay, so we're going to find out which ones of you are on the right track. Because tonight we'll be discussing how the process of changing your own mind and changing the minds of others actually works. Why is it that we hold on to some beliefs so firmly while we're quite happy to let go of others? And do minds ever truly change? To find out, we're joined tonight by science journalist and author David McRaney. He has many interests, but among them are the internet, psychology, and technology. And in the last couple of years, he has published popular books such as You Are Now Less Dumb and You Are Not So Smart. Yeah. They're quite alike, those two. And in his most recent book, titled How Minds Change, he investigates why we believe what we believe and how we can change that. We'll first listen to a lecture by him, and after that I'll be having a discussion with him and with philosopher of mind of the Radboud University, Marc Slors. And after that there'll be some time for some of you to ask your questions. My name is Pam Teunissen. I am a program developer at Radboud Reflects, and I'll be acting as moderator tonight. Okay, let's start. Give a warm welcome to David McRaney.
Well. Got ourselves a fine mess of people up here who want to learn about the mind. Well, that's what I do. I talk about that's not the actual accent. I just wanted to play with you for a moment because that is the accent of where I'm from. But we have been gifted with the flattening of the world and the flattening of my accent. I am going to talk about the mind quite a bit with you, though. I am a science journalist, but the good thing about being a science journalist is you get to, over time, develop your own beat. My beat is the psychology of reasoning and decision-making and judgment. And then over time, that has sort of been narrowed down to the psychology of motivated reasoning. If you've never heard of this term, you have experienced motivated reasoning. I have a go-to example that I like to use that is relevant to the talk I'm going to give. So, have you ever had someone in your life who recently fell in love with somebody, and you ask them, well, okay, they're head over heels. They can't stop talking about it. You're like, great, okay, that's great. What are the reasons you have to be so in love with this person? And they typically say something like, well, I mean, where do I start? The way they walk, like the way they cross a room, they just glide through the room. It's so nice. The way they talk, the way they form words, the language, the poetry of their voice. I even like the way they cut their food. Honestly, like I love to watch them like go through a meal. Sometimes I forget to eat. And this music they've introduced me to, they've opened me up to a whole other way of seeing the world. And you just go, yeah, that's great. I love it. It's so nice to see you happy. And then later on, a few months later, maybe they're breaking up with that exact same person, and you ask, well, what reasons do you have to be breaking up with that person? And they say, well, I don't know. The way they walk, it's just so jangly. It's, the way they talk, honestly, like I feel like they're scraping my bones with their fingernails. The other day, even the way they eat, the way they cut their food, like I saw them try to cut a candy bar with a fork and knife and poke it and eat it. And I was like, I can't believe this person is in my life. And the music they make me listen to, like a cross-country trip is torture. Now, what you notice that I hope you've all experienced this. The idea here is the reasons are inert, right? They're still facts about this person, but reasons for can become reasons against when the motivation to search for justifications for your current emotional state changes because your current emotional state is different from what it was before. And this is sort of the nature of why when you're trying to change people's minds with facts, it doesn't always work so well, because facts can be employed in either direction to justify just about anything. You can pick and choose amongst them. You can cherry pick evidence to support just about any argument. And I can imagine if someone is trying to convince you that the earth is flat and they just handed you a flyer and it said, here are 5 bullet points about why the earth is flat, would that convince you of anything? Even if they were facts, even if they're actual true evidence? Probably not. But we seem to be kind of stuck in that mode here lately. We've introduced, when we find people in our lives who are trying to change our minds with raw facts, or we're trying to change theirs. So, I don't know if you've noticed, that has led to some really weird stuff here lately. Really weird stuff, right? I've been writing about this and doing a podcast about this for a long time, a couple of books too, about motivated reasoning and how it alters the way we see the world. And when we started seeing the rise of at least attention toward conspiratorial thinking, especially during COVID, I have to admit, a little part of me was like, see, you're all catching up to me. I've been telling you about this forever. And it was really astonishing to me how much moral panic we were experiencing during this time, because it had started way earlier. I would kind of put it back around 2016. That's when my interest in this started, and that's how the book kind of got generated, was in 2016, the Oxford Dictionary named post-truth its word of the year because of how much it was being used. In fact, the Washington Post said, it's official, truth is dead, facts are passé, which is the beginning of a moral panic across the media in the United States, at least. You had the New York Times say we have entered the age of post-truth politics. You had the New Yorker chime in, why facts do not change our minds. You had the Atlantic say, this article won't change your mind, about the fact that articles like this won't change your mind, about how articles like this won't change your mind. And we started getting to that infinite recursion, Hall of Mirrors meta place, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, just recently discussed. And it started getting really odd when they started using terms from philosophy. We have Vox chiming in the middle of all this. America is now facing an epistemic crisis. We've entered into personal enclaves of truth. And it all culminates, for me at least, in this 2017 super ominous Time magazine cover, which I feel like you read it the way the old movie announcers would read this. Is truth dead? Question mark. Is truth dead? Well, we were all wondering this all of a sudden, as if this had never happened to us before. And I was thinking, I have a lot to say about this. And I had a couple of things introduce me to the idea that maybe I could write a book about it. One of those things was someone walked up to me after a lecture about motivated reasoning. And it was a nice young woman who said that her father had recently fallen into a conspiracy theory. And she asked me, what do I do to get him out of that conspiracy theory? How do I change his mind? And I flippantly told her, nothing, you can't. And I felt that come out of me like, ugh. I felt that I hated the words coming out of my mouth and hated myself a little bit for saying them. I didn't like that pessimistic viewpoint. And also I didn't think I knew enough about the topic to say that, but I had been part of a community that liked to use the phrase, you can't reason a person out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. But then I started to wonder, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should change my mind about that. Also, the other thing that happened around the same time was, in the United States, attitudes about same-sex marriage flipped dramatically. I had a guest on my podcast, a political scientist, who told me it was the fastest change in public opinion ever recorded. And we've only been recording it since the 1920s, but it was the fastest we'd ever recorded. If you weren't part of the activism, it really felt like you just turned around one day and the whole country had changed its mind on this. Now, of course, it actually took many decades of work, but the part where it actually did flip did only take place over the course of a few years, and over a decade really total. The numbers are about 62% of the United States was opposed to same-sex marriage, and then a decade later, 62% of the United States was in favor of it. And I had this thought experiment in my head of what if you take all those people, send them back in time in a time machine to meet themselves? Would they argue with themselves with the same fervor and anger that people today argue about wedge issues that are active now? And I thought they probably would. So what happened between these 2 points in time? And I really want to know what happened in their brains. Like, how do people change their minds at the level of neurons? And could I work that all the way up to the level of social movements? So I went on the road. And one of the first places I went to was Westboro Baptist Church. This is an actual photo I took while I was there. I'm sure you're familiar with Westboro Baptist Church. Is that two outside of? No, everybody knows about Westboro, right? I went to their Valentine's Day services. They were okay. They were going to go protest Hallmark headquarters, which is nearby in the neighboring city, for introducing same-sex Valentine's Day cards. I also visited the Rainbow House across the street. This is you can imagine that real estate's very cheap here, and it only costs $40,000 for a group of activists to buy that house, paint it in the rainbow flag colors, and then do things like have a wedding for Dumbledore and Gandalf on the front lawn in front of Westboro. They did that kind of stuff all the time. But over time, they turned that into a halfway home for LGBTQ youth, and it's an active place where people come through town trying to find their way. And I spent time with them. They told me that every morning they go outside and drink coffee, and they do the howdy neighbor thing with Westboro. And I was one of the first places I visited. I said, I can't imagine this. In another era, I feel like you would have bombed each other. One of these two houses would have burned down by now. So it clued me into this. It was a much more complicated topic than maybe I thought it was going to be. And I went from there to visit famous 9/11 truthers who had changed their minds, were excommunicated by their groups. I visited activist communities who had developed conversation techniques, one of which we're going to demonstrate after I get to this talk, in which they change people's minds. They go door to door, over 17,000 individual conversations going door to door, A/B testing their technique. They've reached a point where social scientists are studying why does your technique work so well. And mainly what they do is they avoid arguing through a particular set of rhetorical techniques. I also spent time with people like professional magicians who are really good at getting around skepticism and know how to avoid arguing with people. I also spent time with street epistemologists, who are people who, unbeknownst to them, were doing the exact same thing as the people who were doing the activist technique door to door. They had never met, but by A/B testing their rhetoric, they arrived at the same thing that seems to work in most situations, which we will demonstrate a little bit later. I also went to Sweden and interviewed live in front of an audience, a very big audience, the spokesperson for the Flat Earthers. This is Marc Slors. They had this notion, they heard that I was working on this book. They said, why don't you come use one of those techniques on a flat earther, like the most prominent flat earther, and see if you can change his mind on stage. And the story's in the book. It was neat. We got to a point where he and I got, we saw eye to eye on a couple of things. I also want to tell you that amongst all the conspiracy theory communities I hung out with, flat earthers, the best. They are so much fun. If you want to party with a conspiracy theory group, flat earthers know how to party. We went out and hung out and had drinks and everything, and they're really actually quite open-minded people, except for one very specific topic. So this also led me to take all of this material I was gathering and go into academia, go into science, the room with scientists. These are people who study how we make sense of the world through vision, people who study how children create models of reality as they move through the stages of development. I also spent time with Ogilvy Change, people who they actually employ social scientists, they pull them out of academia, and they use what they tell them to convince you to buy soap and stuff like that. This all led eventually to very complex scientific models of persuasion, conversation, and rhetoric, and so on. And at some point, I put down my pencil and said, "This is the book that you should read about how to change people's minds." So this is that book in your fantastic language. Thank you, Maven Publishing. So let me talk about a couple things from the book. There's no way I can tell you everything from it. There are a couple things I think would be fun to do in front of an audience. And there'll be a little bitty tiny bit of audience participation in a moment, so get ready for that. This is the great Jean Piaget. You might want to know, what do scientists have to say about how do you change your mind? Well, there's a pretty standard model that won't tell you everything, but it'll get us kind of on the same page for stuff later. I always think of him whenever somebody gives me a mixed drink at a bar and they put it in a tall glass. And I'm like, I know what Piaget did. He's the one, if you recall from your Psychology 101 classes, you could take a short glass and you put it into a tall glass, and children will assume you've magically made more liquid, but at a certain age, without being told, they go, I know what's happening here. And he was interested in, okay, there seems to be stages of knowledge development, stages where we start to understand how models should function in the world. And that led him to something we call assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is interpreting novel information as further confirmation of what you already believe is predictable and understandable about life. Whereas accommodation is acknowledging when novel information suggests your current understanding is incomplete or incorrect, and you update your understanding to accommodate the information in order to establish a more predictable reality. A bunch of gobbledygook. Let's give a better example. Check out this dog. Okay. So when you have a child who encounters this for one of the first times they've ever seen it, parents and adults love to say, look, dog, look, dog, dog, look, dog. How do you say dog in Dutch? That. They say that over and over again. Dog, 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 dog. And the child, something categorical happens in their mind. It's something along the lines of, okay, not a person, not wearing clothes, covered in fur, walks on four legs, tail. Got it, dog. And then later on, they may see something like this, and they may say, oh, look, dog. Or if they're a little bit more advanced, they could say, big dog. And it seems to fit, right? They're attempting to assimilate into the category they've already established. Non-human, walks on four legs, covered in fur, got a tail. You told me this was dog. And we say, no, that's not a dog, that's a horse. Something new has to happen. They have to create an overarching category in which both dogs and horses fit. They may not have a word for this yet, but it would be something along the lines of creature or animal. They must accommodate this. They must expand their mind. And we're doing this at all times. You're doing it right now. Together we're doing this. You've done it all day long. You've done it all week long. We're always assimilating and accommodating. But as your model gets more and more complex, it becomes a lot easier, a lot less cognitively expensive, a lot less calorically expensive to assimilate. Just to assume, yes, that's another example of everything I already know about how the world works. And it's also when you get challenged by new information that could suggest you're wrong about the world, it's easy to do a little gymnastics and just make it fit into what you think the world already works like. So that's assimilation and accommodation. And you may wonder, has this ever been studied in the lab? And it has. I love this study. This is a study that was done in the 1950s by Bruner and Postman at Harvard. This is what they did. They asked people to sit down in front of a screen like this, and they said, we're going to show you playing cards. And whenever you can identify the suit and color, I want you to press the button on your clicker, and we'll give you another card. But say it out loud, and we'll give you another card. And they're like, got it. So this is how the thing, what they were like, okay, that is a black two of clubs. They're like, click. Yes, that is a red ace of spades. Yes, click. That is a black nine of diamonds. And they did start to slow down. Their speech started to get troubled in this way. And then right about here, they would say, that is a black king of hearts. And they couldn't tell what was happening, but they did feel very uncomfortable as the study proceeded, because what the scientists hadn't told them was that they had mixed into the cards a bunch of anomalies. They had created cards that were the wrong color for their suit. And unbeknownst to the subjects, their brains were noticing this, and they were slowing down their response time the more and more they turned up the dial of how many anomalies are getting mixed into the thing. And when you chart it this is the part. I'm getting ahead of myself because I love this crazy mad scientist study so much, because they entered into something they called a perceptual crisis. This is a moment where they just sort of locked up and felt like, I can go no further, but I don't know why I can go no further. I'm just looking at playing cards. And these are actual quotes from the study at this moment of perceptual crisis. Well, I'll be damned if I know whether it's red or what. Real quote, right? And they would sweat. They would be scared. It didn't even look like a card that time. This is my favorite one. I'm not even sure now what a spade looks like. My God! And this moment of terror always preceded the moment where they go, oh, wait, okay, I get it. Yes, some of these cards are different colors. That perceptual crisis always preceded the next moment. And they call that moment the shock of recognition. It's the moment when you realize that there are anomalies in the mix I have to accommodate in order to make sense of this model of reality. So this is the same thing that happens with the dog and horse moment, except it's for playing cards. We're always doing this at all times. And it follows a trajectory. At first, the anomalies are invisible. You just click the button. You just name it. It's like everything I've ever seen before. You just slide it in. You say it without noticing they are anomalies. And you can see on this chart, what you have here is the number of anomalies and the response time of the subject. The response time creeps up and up and up until it drops back to normal again. Because at some point they hit the middle ground. That's when they hear the perceptual crisis. They would actually say things like the card's purple, or they say the card is gray. They're trying to make it be halfway between what they understand and what they don't. And they're trying to really shove it in there, assimilate. And then they have that moment, that shock of recognition, and they create a new perceptual category, cards that can be different colors. And the response time goes back to zero. They can now predict the world normally. Well, that's how minds change. Thank you for being here. That's one of the big pieces of the puzzle that we established somewhere around 1960. And along with this came a lot of questions as to okay, if this is how it works, why don't we just do this all the time when somebody tells us we're wrong about something? Why don't we just accept it? Why is it so hard to convince people of things? Why do we resist changing our minds? And we don't resist changing our minds universally. There are things we really resist and things we don't resist so much. So enter the psychology of reasoning. This is Thomas Kuhn discussing that very study we were talking about. He said, novelty emerges only with difficulty, manifested by resistance against the background provided by expectation. And resistance is the key thing here I'd like to discuss for a moment. Of course, it is important to resist. I mean, if I told you right now, I don't know, like if I tried to convince you should drink bleach every morning because it's really good for your colon or something, resistance probably is a good idea there. It's okay to resist. We naturally resist via the assimilation and accommodation process. There has to be enough anomalies in the model before we start trying to accommodate. So that's one way we resist. But there are other forms of resistance. I'd like to discuss another one with you. This is Peter Wason, considered the father of the psychology of reasoning, and he can demonstrate one of the other ways we do this through a little game, and this is the audience participation part. All you have to do is raise and lower your hands. I'm going to think of 3 numbers out of all the numbers in the universe. And all you have to do is try to figure out what is the secret rule I'm using to pick out those numbers. It's very easy. And all you have to do is raise and lower your hands. So here's how I'm going to see if you're playing along. I want everyone to raise their hands initially, and then you lower your hands when you think you have figured out my rule. Let me repeat. I'm going to show you 3 numbers. I have a secret rule I'm using to pick them out. When you think you've figured out my rule, lower your hands. Okay, first, everyone raise your hands. Wonderful. Feels like a classroom, and I like it. So here we go. 2, 4, 6. Yeah, this always happens. Okay, I don't even have to keep going. Great. All right, there's only one person left. Sir, I cannot help you. I hope you're okay. I hope you're seeking medical attention. 10, 12, 14. You don't have to re-raise your hand. If it's down, if it's still the same rule, keep it down. And 24, 26, 28. Great. We're all on the same page. So what Peter Wason would ask next is, okay, if you figured out my rule, then you pick out 3 numbers using my rule. So I would like you all to privately pick out 3 numbers using the secret rule. I'm going to go ahead and ask Mark, you pick out 3 numbers using my rule. Go ahead. What do you got?
30, 32, 34.
30, 32, 34. Thank you very much. Yes, those 3 numbers use my rule. And we could, at this moment, walk away feeling like, well, that's that. We figured out the rule. But I will also show you some other numbers that use my rule. Now, 1, 2, 3, and 33, 3,371, and 9,999. Because the rule is any 3 numbers, one bigger than the last. But if I was picking out even numbers using that rule, which each one is bigger than the last, you may have assumed that the rule is 3 even numbers in a row. And when you picked out 3 even numbers in a row, since it does comport with the actual rule, and I told you were right, you may assume that your assumption, you would assume your assumption, is correct, that it was 3 even numbers in a row, and you walk away thinking you knew something about the world that you didn't. And we call that confirmation bias. And you may have heard this quite a bit talked about in the media. I always cringe a little bit because it's never actually described in the way it really works. This is the way it works. The way it works is something happens in the natural world. You have a hunch, you understand why it happened. You go searching for confirmation of your hunch, and if you find anything that confirms it, you stop looking for more information. In psychology, they actually have a term for this. It's called the makes sense stopping rule. It's the least sexy term in all of science. The makes sense stopping rule. I'll stop because it makes sense. There's an issue, though. This is a sort of a fundamental aspect of human behavior. It's very rational to do this. If you're looking for your keys, you've lost them, you should look for them in your kitchen, right? Not like go to NASA and try to explore Mars to see if your keys may be lying around there. It's best to confirm your assumptions most of the time. But with the power of the internet, when you believe things that are very strange, when you have some odd hypotheses, you can go on the internet and find confirmation of anything that you think might be true. Here's a good example of this. We'll need audio from the slides for this. Oop. I'll back up. We'll do it again. Okay, if you can't hear it, she's saying vaccines cause autism. He says, I have 1 million results that say they don't and 1 result that says they do. And she says, thank you, I knew it. And then he says, just because I have it, it doesn't mean it's true. He's supposed to be Google as a person. This is this happens pretty regularly, and so confirmation bias is one of the forms of resistance. It's very difficult to change a person's minds with facts alone because they can go find facts that confirm their assumptions and say, why didn't you find these facts? And we can have a battle of Google. And you may have done this with a family member. Have you ever been on the receiving end of a bunch of links to YouTube or the receiving end of a bunch of links to articles you ought to read? Now ask yourself, have you also been on the sending end of that? Have you countered with some links of your own? And where did that go for you? I'm wondering if anybody achieved their end goal with that. Probably not, right? That's confirmation bias. That's one of the things we have to overcome with some of the conversational techniques we'll talk about. Another form of resistance is much more surreptitious. It's much more difficult to notice this in life, and this is naive realism. Naive realism is the intuition that you see the world as it truly is, free from bias or the limitation of your senses, which I can disprove very quickly and easily by just showing you that I doubled all the these. And you may not have noticed that. You may have just read the paragraph and moved on as if they weren't doubled. So clearly there's some bias. There is some cognitive interference between the really real objective world and the subjective reality that you experience and walk around within. And we all became intimately familiar with this concept that it's the result of thinking, not the process of thinking, that appears spontaneously in consciousness, with something you may recall that we call the dress. The dress. I feel like it must be whispered, hushed tones only with the dress. I have talked about the dress to a number of people. I have never visited a country or talked to someone of any age who has not seen this image. And that's because it's the most viral thing that ever viraled in the history of ever. It is the most viral phenomenon that probably will ever happen in any of our lifetimes. It was right at that sweet spot of the internet. And if you're not familiar with the dress, this is an image for which some people see one way and some see the other. We can see it right here. By show of hands, who sees this as a gold and white dress? About half the room. Who sees this as a black and blue dress? Oh, about 70%. 30-70 right there. So clearly there's a question here. And if we're talking about philosophical concepts, what's the truth? Is this a white and gold dress or is this a black and blue dress? And your subjective reality for some say it's one way and for others say it's the other. Well, which way is it? Is this dress black and blue or is it white and gold? Well, that bizarre feeling that people felt when witnessing this and talking about it with their friends led to hashtags like blue and black, white and gold, Dressgate, and the dress. These are still the most trending hashtags that ever trended ever in the history of ever. They trended so much that they broke Twitter for a while. Long before Elon Musk broke Twitter, these broke Twitter. They were being shared so much with these hashtags going alongside of it that Twitter wouldn't even load on people's phones. It could not handle that kind of traffic. And that's all they were doing was trying to talk about, have you seen this thing? And I remember that people chiming in on it left and right, so much so that the Washington Post, and this is such a sweet thing considering how weird the world got after this, they said, this is the drama that divided a planet. We were such sweet summer children. We had no idea what we were in store for. But kind of this presaged a lot of what we were going to do later, and I'll show you why that's true in a moment. Celebrities chimed in. You have Taylor Swift. I don't understand this odd dress debate, and I feel like it's a trick somehow. I'm confused and scared. Also, obviously, blue and black. Then you have Kim Kardashian. What color is the dress? I see white and gold. Kanye sees black and blue. Which one of us is colorblind? You have BJ Novak, very, very short and sweet, white and gold. And then his friend chimes in, Mindy Kaling. It's blue and black. It's a blue and black dress. Are you effing kidding me? And this is trending all over the internet. I remember seeing it like at the end of local news reports. There would be people who, right after the weather and the sports, they would be like, hey, Tommy, have you seen this dress thing? And they'd show it. It was everywhere. Well, I was talking about working on this book project, and I knew that at some point I wanted to get into neurons and work my way up a little bit. But I was worried that there was no way I could talk about that would be fascinating or interesting. And I have a bunch of contacts at NYU, and someone there said, we have somebody at NYU that's working on something that I think would be useful for your book. They figured out the dress. I was like, how is that useful for the book? And they said, you'll see if you meet them. And surely enough, they were right. I'll tell you the story of how this all went down for me. That's Pascal Wallish, and that's Michael Karlovich. They're neuroscientists. Their specialty is color vision. Their specialty is perception in general, but their micro specialty is how do brains see stuff. And when I first met them, they were kooky and strange and fun. And we went to a restaurant in New York City, and before I could even start asking questions, Michael slid a phone over with this exact image and said, "Hey, what do you see here?" I was like, "It's an egg." He was like, "Yeah, what color's the egg?" I said, it's green, kind of yellow-green, greenish yellow." He's like, damn. And he pulled it away and put it in his pocket. Everybody says that. He was so frustrated because this was one of the first things they tried. They thought that some people would have seen a lot of green eggs and ham. They were familiar with green eggs and ham, Dr. Seuss, and that they would see the green egg and everybody else would see yellow eggs. But that's not how it works. We all see the green egg. Unless anybody sees a yellow egg here. Let's not get into that yet. What they were searching for was, they called it a perfectly perceptually ambiguous color object. They wanted to find something that everybody was familiar with, but no one would be able to determine its exact nature color-wise. And it took them a long time to find something like that until they finally arrived at the perfectly perceptually ambiguous color object that we are all familiar with, and it is this, the wondrous croc. The croc. This is a perfectly perceptually ambiguous color object. What do I mean by that? Well, this used to be in color. I threw it in Photoshop and took the color out. And now I want you to imagine, what color was the croc? And if I went around and polled you all, we'd get a lot of different answers. And the answers would depend on your previous experiences with crocs. And likely, if you'd never had an experience with, say, a camouflage croc or a pink and yellow croc or a orange croc, you wouldn't say that. You'd only say things you were roughly familiar with. So your priors determine your disambiguation. That's the term for it. I love that word. I named my newsletter this. I love this word, disambiguation, because what you have here is something that's ambiguous. And to make it not ambiguous, to disambiguate it, you have to depend on your previous experiences with the thing. In this case, it's all your previous experiences with crocs. And I hope most of you have had good experiences with crocs in the past. But there were some missing elements here. And you might be wondering, how did this even become a thing? Well, before I explain why this is up here, here's why they decided to pick the croc. You have Michael Karlovich. Well, before I get into that, let me explain this. This is too long of a story. I want to show you why I'm showing this image first. These are called bistable perceptual illusions. They're called interpersonal bistable perceptual illusions. Interpersonal means that every brain does the same thing. And bistable means that this is ambiguous, but you disambiguate it in one of two ways. So every one of us sees both a duck and a rabbit, the duck rabbit. This is called the Rubin vase. You're probably familiar with a simpler version of this, but this was the original version of it. People in silhouette or a vase. And you go back and forth between the two things. Duck, rabbit, duck, rabbit, duck, rabbit. And every one of us does that. That's bistable, because it's ambiguous. Two possible disambiguations. Can't pick between the two, so you vacillate. Now, the dress, though, was an intrapersonal bistable illusion. And what makes this different is, there are two different possible disambiguations, but each brain picks only one, and you stick with it, which enters that strange moment of, like, how can you possibly say that this dress is this color? It's obviously this color. So they knew this already existed, so this was one piece of the puzzle. The next part of the puzzle was something called color constancy. And this is a good example of how facts are not going to matter. There's no way I can convince you of this with words alone. Squares A and B are the exact same color. I mean it. They really are the exact same color. And there's no way I could probably convince you of this just by hoping you trust and believe me. Maybe some of you believe me. Maybe most of you are like, prove it. So I threw it into Photoshop and screen capped it so we could prove it together. So let me go ahead and grab the little grabber. Let's grab A. And I'm going to scoot it down to B. Beep, 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 beep. See? Same color. Now, I feel like skepticism in the room. Like, well, what if we move it up? What if we take B and move it up to A? All right, we'll do that. We'll grab B. I got to remember how Photoshop works. And then scoobity-bop, beady-bop, beady-bop-boo. Same color. And then still, there are some people like, can I see them side by side? Indeed, you can. I'm going to grab both of these and put them in the strange checkered nether regions of Photoshop. And you'll see, indeed, same color. Oop, I think my animation did it before it happened. Well, trust me, they're the same color. So what's the deal here? Well, first of all, clearly this isn't an actual cylinder, an actual checkerboard. It's an illustration. But it still fools your eyes the way a painting would fool your eyes to give you the idea of depth or something like that. It's because it's throwing a shadow. And there are many terms for this in neuroscience. Color constancy is one of them. And we don't know exactly the full neural explanation of what's going on, but it comes up every time we study it. It seems to be that, and there are many hypotheses as to why this is so, if something is cast in shadow, in darkness, your brain, without your permission, without your knowledge, will adjust the contrast of the image you're receiving subjectively. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar philosophically with the idea that we don't actually live in the really real world in here. This is a illusion that is generated by the brain to help you navigate reality. For some people, that is a shocking revelation that the dress gave them for the first time. But the way I look at this is a lie that your brain tells you because it's more useful than the truth. The hypothesis here, there are many. One of them is maybe this is so that we can determine what color something is. If something is blood in low light conditions, it would be useful for us to know that. So we turn up the contrast in low light conditions. Some scientists think maybe it's to see fruit in low light conditions, to know when it's ripe, because that would be useful. Whatever the actual truth of it is, this is why when you look in your closet, you can tell if your sweater is green, because you turn up the contrast a little bit of things that are cast in darkness. There's another example of this that doesn't involve any animation, and it's called the strawberries illusion. There are no red pixels in this image. There's no red whatsoever taking place here on this screen. All the red that you're experiencing is happening only inside your mind. There's no red wavelengths of the color spectrum coming out of the projector, bouncing off of this and going into your pupils. It is purely generated subjectively. What, right? Like, it's weird. Why is it happening? Well, because you've had a lot of experiences with strawberries. This is an ambiguous image. You're disambiguating into the color red. Why the color red? Well, red's useful. Blood, remember, and fruit, those sorts of things. This actually is a black and white image that's overexposed in teal. You've had a lot of experiences with things overexposed in teal. You're just not aware of that. Your brain's aware of it. It's doing this without your permission, without your knowledge. And what it's doing is it's not only is it adjusting the contrast, when something that is in the red side of the spectrum is overexposed in teal, it turns it black and white if you were getting the raw information from the wavelengths that are being bounced back and forth. So in those cases, since that's happened many times in your life and it's useful to see things that are red, it adds red back into the picture for you. And you can see this. You can just put your hand over the bits and pieces of this image, and you can actually see the truth of it back and forth. It's black and white, overexposed in teal. I love it. It's so bizarre. So, Michael Karlovich and Pascal Walsh decided that they had enough information to conduct a gigantic study, and that's what they did. It was a really big study. They had 13,000 participants. They had a very conservative p-value, lots of replication prior to publication. They shared all of their information with other scientists, had them do the same work. It was open science, and people weren't excluded for strange reasons. And here's what they discovered. The dress, you can see it right here. You see the burst of light in the upper right-hand portion of it? It's overexposed, and it's ambiguous as to the nature of this overexposure. Is it overexposed in skylight, sunlight, or is it overexposed in incandescent light? See, this image was taken by a woman who was on her way to a wedding, and, well, not on her way. The wedding was a couple of months in advance, and she took a picture of it with a crappy phone on a cloudy day through a window. She sent it to her family and said, should I get this dress? Should I wear it to the thing? And lots of people in the family were saying, I don't think you should wear a gold dress. And there were other people in the family who were saying, I don't think you should wear a blue dress. And there are lots of people saying, what's going on? It's their family lost its mind. And eventually they had the wedding and they talked about this story. And the musician who came to the wedding thought this was a great story. She shared it on her social media, and the virality began there. So that's why it's so ambiguous, the phone and the time of day. And what they figured out through their research is that is the secret. If you have had more experiences in your life with things that are overexposed in light coming from the sky, you will disambiguate this as if it is overexposed by that kind of light. If you've had more experiences with things that are overexposed in this kind of light, you will disambiguate it as if it is overexposed in incandescent, artificial light. And that means people who wake up very early, who work around windows, who garden a whole lot, they have a whole different set of priors when it comes to overexposure. And there are people who get up late at night, they don't work around windows, they don't go outside very much, they sleep in late. they have a whole different set of priors when it comes to overexposure. And you can see on the color spectrum here, daylight is mostly on the blue side of the spectrum. And so if you're one of those people, you think it's overexposed in blue, you subtract the luminant, that's how they put it, from the image, and you end up with a white and gold dress. If you are the kind of person who assumes things are overexposed in incandescent artificial light, you'll assume it's overexposed on the yellow side of things. You'll subtract the yellow, and you get a black and blue dress. And you may have never, ever seen it the way other people see it. I offer this to you now. That's how you see it from the other side. By the way, I've actually seen the real dress. It's black and blue in the really real world. Also, I asked them if I could wear this, and they said absolutely not. They were very afraid I would destroy the actual dress, and they consider it like almost a holy relic at this point. So that is the question, though, right? This is in the really real world, and especially if you have a good camera, you can see it's black and blue. But the image is not black and blue. It's also not white and gold. It's neither. It's a perfectly perceptually ambiguous color object, which means the truth of the image is whatever your brain says it is, which enters into a really bizarre philosophical space, right? Your subjective reality in this case is the truth, even though somebody else's subjective reality is also the truth. Okay, so if you want to replicate this scientifically, you'd have to go through you have to understand this perfectly, and you'd have to actually generate it again. And the strange thing about the dress is there are only about 4 objects so far that we found images that do this to people, and all of them went viral. There's the sneaker and the dresser drawers. They estimate there's about 1 in 10 billion images are perfectly perceptually ambiguous. Their task was, could we recreate it? And they felt like if we recreated it, it would be almost like generating atomic energy. So we'd understand the issue so well that we created something from nature on our own, like a nuclear bomb or a nuclear reactor. And they legitimately told me that that's what they did. They created the nuclear bomb of cognitive science, and I want you to see it for yourselves. Here it is, the nuclear bomb of cognitive science, the socks and Crocs image. How many people, by show of hands, when you see this, see pink Crocs? Yeah, look around. How many people don't see pink Crocs? Half and half. They did it. They did it. They pulled it off. They replicated it. Very briefly, because I don't have very much time, here's how they replicated it. Michael Karlovich used to work in when he was an undergrad, he was in a grow house where they were growing plants, and they used green grow lights. There was somebody in the grow house who had Crocs on. He looked down, the Crocs were gray. When they went outside, the Crocs were pink. He was like, oh, I get what's going on there. There's only green light in the grow house. These can't reflect back that light, so I only saw them as gray. But now I'm in the sun, I see them as pink. Cool. He goes back inside the grow house, and they're still pink. And he goes, oh, no, that's amazing. I didn't know that I could adapt my priors so quickly. I know they're supposed to be pink, and my brain's turning them into pink because they're in that red side of the spectrum that we seem so sensitive to. And that's what made him go, we could probably replicate this. And that's what they did. They got Crocs, pink Crocs. They got white socks, which is the secret sauce of this whole thing. They overexposed them in very, very green light. And what you end up with is that if you believe the truth of the image or the truth of what the image was when it was captured, you get 2 different subjective realities because, yeah, these are pink Crocs overexposed in green, but it makes the socks seem green because they're reflecting back all the light. They're white socks. And they found a strange correlation here. The older a person is, the more likely they see pink Crocs. The younger a person is, the more likely they see not pink because what they see are green socks. And what seems to be happening here, at least in the population they studied, was the older you are, the more exposure you've had to a world where all socks were white. And then younger people have spent more time in a world where you can wear multicolored socks. You have different priors, different sock priors, different experiences with socks. And because of those different experiences with socks, you get 2 completely different realities when I show you this image. That's the power of disambiguation. And it's important. It's important because I want you to imagine what would happen if we got into an argument on this. Pascal Walsh and Michael Karlovich have this model. They call it SURFPAD. Substantial uncertainty combined with ramified, which means branching, or forked prior assumptions causes disagreement. One set of life experiences, another set of life experiences, a moment of ambiguity. And the ambiguity never registers. For me, that is the key to all this. The ambiguity never registers. For neither party do they feel like, I feel this is an ambiguous moment. No, they just get something that feels like the truth. The strangeness of this is they get two completely different truths when they disambiguate it through their different priors. And this can cause a massive disagreement. And I don't think I need to make the leap for you that we don't just do this with dresses and Crocs. We do this with literally everything. And we argue about a lot of stuff today because we're disambiguating it differently. And they told me, Michael Karlovich and Pascal Walsh asked me to imagine, they said it's not beyond the scope of imagination that if a bunch of people who see the dress one way got together online and started spending a lot of time together online, they might form a community online. They might start talking about other issues. They might even form some political clout. They might end up affecting elections as a group of people that started out as the black and blue party. And you have another group of people who did the same thing with the white and gold. This little nugget of something that bound them together perceptually could end up with two very different modes of reasoning and two very different communities. And imagine someone who's trying to argue with someone about the dress where you were facing off against each other. And all you want to do is win the argument. You want to prove you're right and they're wrong. You want to defeat them. And you defeat them by saying, no, this is how you should see the dress. Something's wrong with your mind. Something's messed up with you. You've been misled. I don't know. Maybe you're drinking too much. Something's going on that you can't see the truth of the image. And if you got in that kind of debate with someone, you would both lose. There's no way to actually get to the real truth of what's going on. Because what you need to do that is get side to side, shoulder to shoulder. And you have to say something along the lines of, isn't it strange and bizarre that I consider you a reasonable human being? You're just like me, but we disagree about this. What if we treated that as a mystery and we try to solve that mystery together? Why do we disagree? And only in that dynamic would you have any possibility of landing in that space where we have all these research papers that tell us the actual deeper truth behind all this. It's neither white or gold nor black and blue, and there's all sorts of brain stuff that was never available to us if either one of us had won that previous debate. So what I advocate for in How Minds Change is to do that, to have that kind of conversation with other people. It's the only way to actually persuade anyone. It's also the only way to actually persuade yourself through conversation with someone and reveal your own ignorance. And it gets you out of dead-end arguing and debating, the sort of thing that leads nowhere, the sort of thing that our current platforms encourage because they're not built to have a conversation the way that we evolved to have conversations. And it turns out we're very good at this. We're very good at the production and evaluation process. And those groups I mentioned earlier, this one is called Deep Canvassing. That's Dave Fleischer. They went door to door long enough to discover this sort of ancient truth from the halls of rhetoric that has reemerged thanks to people trying to work on political campaigns and stuff like that. And you have people like Anthony Magnabosco, who is the spokesperson for street epistemology, who discovered that exact same truth as the deep canvassers by doing this on college campuses and asking people, how do you feel about karma? How do you feel about flat earth? How do you feel about the moon landing? And they arrived at something called there's a topic rebuttal and technique rebuttal. They arrived at something called technique rebuttal. And like I said earlier, the thing that blew my mind about this is I found all these different organizations, not just these two. People who use motivational interviewing and therapy, street epistemology, deep canvassing, smart politics. There are dozens of them. Independently, without the awareness that there were other people doing it, without a knowledge of the psychological and scientific literature that supported what they were going for, they all kind of landed at the exact same technique. And if they have a system, a like numbered scale of like do this, then do this, it's the same points that you do, it's the same steps in the process in the same order. And it just astonished me. And so part of doing this book project was I've now introduced all those people together and I hope they do something amazing after they compare notes. But also, in writing the book, I spent a lot of time with each one of these groups, and I've done the techniques a bazillion times. And I'd like to give you a little demonstration of it right now. We're going to do something really neutral. You ready to do this, Mark? Okay, this is going to be nice and easy. Let's make sure Mark can be heard through his microphone. All right. And we could talk about something crazy. We could talk about, I've recently learned about the farmer thing that's going on in this country. There are all sorts, every country's got something that we could talk about like that. I'm going to make it neutral and simple so we don't talk for 30 minutes. But typically these conversations will last 20 to 30 minutes if they're good. Okay, here's how we'll do it. So what was the last movie you remember watching?
Oh, God. I was like this.
Don't stick us here.
Let's say Don't Look Up. It's not the last movie, but it's the one that pops.
What is the name of it?
Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up.
On Netflix.
Oh yeah, I remember Don't Look Up. Okay, yeah.
But it's not the last one. But
It's the last one you can recall. That's fine.
Right, yeah.
Don't Look Up. Let's say you worked for Netflix and you had to like write out the description you're looking at when you're going through. How would you describe that movie? What is it?
It's kind of a satire. It's a parallel of the way that people ignore climate change, basically.
Okay, great. Yeah, I remember watching that too. It's
sort of funny.
It's sort of funny. Like, did you like it?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, you liked it. Well, I'm wondering, like, let's pretend you were a movie reviewer. That was your job, and you had a scale from 1 to 10. You told people, I watched it, and here's the score I give it. What would you get 1 out of 10?
7.
7. Now, and I want you to notice, I want everyone to notice, when I asked you, did you like it, it was very like, poof.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
It's almost like bumping your knee against the table. And like, did that hurt? And you just have to check in with your body. You're like, body, did that hurt? Yes. Body says yes. Yes, hurts. But if I ask what number scale, there's always a little bit of hesitation. Well, and sometimes it lasts a long time. And it's important to stay in the space because what we're doing here is flowing into some sort of metacognition. So if you're cool with it, I'd like to keep going along on that route. Yeah, sure. So you gave it a 7. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm hearing something from you here. I liked it.
Yes.
It was good.
Yeah.
I give it a 7.
Yeah.
So for you, good is 7. And I'm wondering, like, how come you didn't give it like an 8?
Because I thought it was over the top. It was too much.
Over the top.
Yeah.
You don't like over the top movies?
Sometimes I do, but for this particular purpose of portraying the way in which we ignore climate change,
yeah,
I thought it didn't do the job
all right
that well.
Sure.
Because it was too much.
Too much.
Yeah.
Are there any other over the top movies come to mind that you like very much?
Over dinner we talked about
Monty Python.
Monty Python, yeah. Why not?
Yeah. We talked about it earlier. Monty Python.
I was actually thinking of Tarantino, but yeah.
Tarantino. What's a Tarantino movie?
Fiction.
Give me a Tarantino movie that goes above 7 for you.
The one about Hollywood, Once Upon a Time.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So now I'm hearing from you that an over-the-top movie can go above 7.
Yes.
And it feels like earlier you were saying that Don't Look Up doesn't get to go above 7 because it's over the top.
Yeah.
And it feels a little confusing to me how to thread the needle here. Is it the over-the-topness that keeps it from going above 7?
It's what the over-the-topness is used for. So in the case of Don't Look Up, it's used to portray the way in which we ignore climate change.
Yeah.
So it's really about the real world, and it's about that. And it does a pretty good job of making fun of it, of depicting certain aspects of it, yeah, but not other aspects. Right, so that's why I thought over the top is a bit, yeah. Whereas in the case of the Hollywood movie, but I'm not sure we should be discussing movies. But in the case of a Hollywood movie, I would think the whole, yeah. The point is not about. I'm thinking now. I'm thinking out loud. Yeah. This normally takes 30 minutes, right?
It's okay.
It's okay.
I'll let you finish your thought. But this is the place I'm trying to go with you.
Okay, good.
I'm trying to hold space.
Yeah.
Be a non-judgmental listener and let you get there on your own to that point where we're really starting to feel like, I can produce reasons like nonstop, but when I start to really look at them, there's deeper reasons in me.
I was gonna say about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that it's not about that the purpose of the movie is not saying something about the real world, but then I realized that it's not true.
That's right.
Yeah. So you got me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you got you. I didn't say anything.
Yeah. No, it works. Yeah.
So and we go the other way just for a moment. You gave it a 7. One out of 5.
Because I had a good time. It was fun. There were a couple of really good scenes in it. Yeah.
So you're revealing some values to me. You like movies that are fun. Over the top is not necessarily a deal breaker for you. But there seems to be something that's keeping this movie from getting up into the 8, 9, 10 range.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'll have to stop here just for time, but I want you to know that you can have a discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause for no good reason. Let's go.
Was that new?
I'll stop here, but I'll say one last thing about this. You can this technique has stages. There are stages usually something along the lines of you build rapport. We already talked for a couple hours before this, so we already knew each other. The rapport was there. Rapport is all about establishing, hey, I'm not going to steal your agency. We're going to talk. There's consent here. We're just two people trying to discuss an issue. And then you move into, let's make the claim, and then you have the number scale. And all these things are very important. You could apply this to something like in the United States, where there's a lot of debate about gun control. And we could just go right into it in almost the exact same way. Like, let's talk about gun control. You might, with an attitude, you might want to say something like, okay, a 0, let's say if you're very against gun control, a 0 would be, let's say 4 against gun control. A 0 would be, I don't think there should be any gun control. So that means everybody, once a week gets a assault rifle in the mail, regardless of their criminal past. And if you're a 10, if you say the word gun out loud and a police officer hears it, you go to jail for the rest of your life. Where would you put yourself on that scale? And most people can very quickly, when you ask them, are you for or against gun control, will say, I'm for it, I'm against it. And then you say, well, where would you put yourself on a scale as presented? And there's always a moment of, well, probably I'm like an 8, 7, 8. And then when we start talking about, well, what's your justification? What's your rationalization? An astonishing moment takes place where people realize, I may have never actually considered it in that way. And you can hold space for a guided metacognition session. So I recommend you give it a shot. There's more stuff in the book. We had to have time for a conversation. Let's do that now. Thank you.
Can I have that?
That's great.
Thank you so much, David.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to break their necks over this at some point.
Mm-hmm.
We're good. All right. So I have a lot of questions, but
Good.
But first I'm curious to hear from Marc what his thoughts on this are.
Oh, I've got so many questions too.
I can imagine.
So I don't know where to start. And so thanks a lot first. It was a really great talk.
So much fun.
It was really great reading the book as well. Maybe I'll just start somewhere. So the last thing you did with the scale, in all the examples that you, thank you, all the examples that you mentioned of techniques that help people, change their own minds, as you say. All these examples contain the scale.
Sure.
So, and when I read the book, I thought, that scale is doing such, that's the big lever that sort of gets everything going, because you make people implicitly agree with you that, a certain opinion is not black and white. You're not either for or against, but there are options. And also you asked me about I don't really think about movies ever. So you really got me. But, you immediately start sort of weighing pros and cons in your head.
Yeah.
And that's precisely where you want to go. So part of the book is that practical stuff, and part of the book is the theoretical stuff. And the theoretical stuff is mainly about, why do minds resist change? And then, find ways around that, know thy enemy, so to speak. Sure. And, I was just, so what is the science behind the number scale?
It's a bizarre thing. The number scale, each of these groups independently came upon it. Actually, street epistemology borrowed it from deep canvassing once they saw how useful it was. Yeah. The way I got into deep canvassing was being used door-to-door campaigns. I wrote along with them and actually went door-to-door with them for their transgender bathroom campaigns, where they were going door-to-door asking people if they were for or against it. Mm-hmm. And but before then, it was same-sex marriage and many other issues. At this point, they've covered a very wide range. And when social scientists arrived trying to determine whether or not it worked at all, if they just thought it worked, they're like, we got to quantify this. And so they introduced the scale. And before then, they weren't using a scale either. But when they did, it catalyzed it to an nth degree. One of the things it does, which is counterintuitive, I think, maybe, because you're right, this is important that we now aren't seeing it as binary, black and white. But when you are on a canvassing campaign with people who are possibly bigoted or possibly, hate mongering in some way, and you are the group who is being targeted by that hate, sometimes it's very obvious that you are a member of that group. If you're black and the group is racist, and you ask them, how do you feel about this racist issue? and they say on the scale, I'm way up here, and your response to that is interesting. I'm wondering if we're going to talk about that. I wonder why, and you just start talking about it. They realize in that moment they didn't get the door slammed in their face, and that they were heard, and that you may keep listening to them. So there was a value in their work. To the scale shows the kind of conversation I'm going to have with you.
Why is that? Why is it that people don't slam the door in your face when you introduce them to a scale? Why are we interested in that?
That's another bizarre moment. They were astonished by this too. They fully thought that this would be every once in a while someone would talk to me. And when they first started going door to door and record, they had to eventually start recording themselves because the conversations went from being 3 minutes to 15 minutes to 30 minutes to an hour. Mm-hmm. People were so eager to have the conversation. Sometimes it was because the person felt like, you know what, I never really have had an opportunity to kind of work through this with somebody. It's almost a bit like, you can see how it has similarities to therapy. And in a moment, they're like, I would like to have an honest opinion about this, and you're willing to talk to me about it. Sometimes they'd never had contact with somebody who was LGBTQ, or they'd never had much contact with somebody of the race that they had opinions about. This was an opportunity to have an actual conversation with them. But they were really prepared for it to be an argument. And when they realized an argument wasn't happening, there's this campfire thing that we're all ready to do. I'm a big proponent of the interactionist model. Mm-hmm. I talk about that in the book. It's a fairly new model in psychology that reorganizes a lot of the work that I used to cover and shows that we used to consider people as very flawed and irrational, but because of these biased ways we look at the world. But Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber argue none of this is flawed, and all of this is quite rational. But yes, when we produce arguments, we're biased and we're lazy. But when we evaluate arguments, we're neither. And we're set up to have a group dynamic in which someone will produce an argument and other people will evaluate it, and we work together toward common goals. It's like when you get out of I use a lot of movie examples. When you get out of a movie and you're trying to decide where you want to go eat, and somebody might say, I'd like to go have sushi. And that's a very biased and lazy argument. I'd like to go have sushi. And then someone else says, well, I can't do that. I had sushi yesterday. And then someone else says, well, the closest sushi place, my ex works there. I'm not going there. And all these individual arguments appear, and we seem to be innately aware of this. We seem to be an innate function. We have a system for producing, a system for evaluating. We expect them to work together. And in the production side of things, you launch with your easiest, most biased argument, and we work it out as a group. That campfire dynamic has been, in a lot of ways, stolen from us over the last few decades. One of the ways we group up into like-minded enclaves, we often don't get the chance to do it. And the platforms in which we engage one another aren't meant to operate in that way. They're originally meant to just share pictures of like tacos, and then we're trying to discuss politics on them. And they're set up for production only. And the evaluation happens just kind of chaotically and strangely. But I'm sure you've all had the experience of being around a campfire and you're having a conversation with someone in this way, and you start to feel like I'm transcending the flesh into some other space where I'm connecting with this person's humanity, and I may never forget this conversation. We're built for it. And oftentimes those canvassers, when they knock on the door, they were offering that as a gift, even though they were discussing a contentious issue that involved hate. And I think that it really played into people's eagerness to, can I please have this conversation? Please don't go.
But that's a one-on-one discussion or a conversation. And that, I think, you really convincingly shows that works, and you know, what's the science behind that. But when it comes to, conspiracy theories and bigoted people, I mean, they use different techniques, and it seems to me they have an easier job because in a certain sense. So if half the book is about know thy enemy, right? Why does the brain resist changing opinions? Also, part of it is about, you know, how easy it is, and once you're already in a certain camp, to stay there, and for people to keep you there. So if your fight is based on one-on-one conversations and on really difficult techniques to get around, you know, the obstacles that the brain throws up, right? But the opposite side has a really easy job, because the opposite side doesn't have to do the one-on-one conversations, but can just, you know, work by using clickbaits and hate and fear and the easy stuff, right? Aren't we fighting an uphill battle?
Sure,
at least, yeah.
Sure,
okay.
It's hard.
This
is really hard work. I am optimistic by nature, but I'm also optimistic about this. I wasn't always that way because everywhere people are working on this, they're making headway quite rapidly. And I feel like we may just be in a phase. Like we got the internet, we got social media, we got smartphones, and we're just not good at it. It requires a certain kind of literacy. It requires a certain vernacular that we have to earn and learn and share with one another. And the platforms currently, they're about engagement. Engagement is just what an algorithm determines as this kept eyeballs on your web page. The people who operate those platforms must be ethically and morally charged to do something that is more important than pure engagement. And I think we're seeing the first signs of that being important to all of us because we don't like the idea of democracy breaking because we can't stop arguing over stupid things. And please don't let a flat earther try to run for president, as if that has not already happened. See, so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I feel like you didn't make a note of something like this 101 versus maybe one to many.
Yeah, it's how do you scale it up?
Yeah, it is very scalable. One thing that deep canvassers do, they moved on to phone banks, but it's still 101s just at scale.
Okay.
But when it comes to broad messages to large groups of people, oftentimes what it comes down to is inoculation. It's giving people the tools to notice when something may be amiss before the amiss thing comes along.
Amiss in what sense?
There are researchers who will have large groups of people. They'll ask them, "Are you aware that this sort of thing is discussed in this sort of way? Where this is discussed in this sort of way? Did you know that certain entities will seed the internet in this sort of way?" And then release those people into the wild, but study their internet usage, and they're more skeptical. They're more likely to, because they've been inoculated by the concept they could be hoodwinked in some way or another. Mm. When it comes to mass messaging, oftentimes it comes down to can you identify shared values? And I know value is a difficult term to even to define, but there's a psychological concept called value affirmation. And that's what they'll do. It seems impossible, but they'll ask people to remember a time in their life where they had fulfilled their values. They had operated in a way that made them feel like a good person. And then when they are confronted with a contentious issue, they're less likely to go with their group. They're less likely to signal their loyalty to their in-group. They're more likely to adhere to whatever they feel their core values are than whatever values are demonstrated. And that's something that can be done in a broad way. There are other techniques where you need to speak to the group that you're speaking to in the language of their value set. And this tends to be a real problem in America because progressive liberal organizations will try to argue something like climate change in the language of their own in-group. Mm. And they'll say, like, you should care about the planet because you should care about your community. You should care about your neighbor. You should work together to make the planet a better place. This message does not work on large groups of conservatives. Conservatives, however, can be approached in the language of their value set. You could say, don't you want America to be strong? Don't you want America to be able to defend itself against its enemies? Well, in America, where the world's falling apart, where climate change has made it impossible for us to get from one destination to another, China is going to be on our front door any minute now. I think we should worry about climate change. That message has an incredible effectiveness rate. So one of the biggest things is to make sure you couch your messaging in the values of the other side, and to notice that you have lived in sort of a matrix of your own value structure, and you haven't maybe ever spoken with the language of the other.
So what I was wondering, though, is that if you effectively use this method on an individual, how to put this respectfully?
You don't have to be respectful.
No, it's actually about that. How respectful is that towards the autonomy of that person?
That's great. I love you asking that. I try to say in the book, we have to stay. There's a difference between persuasion and coercion, and the ethical persuasion, by my reckoning, is one in which you never ever try to steal the agency of the other party, and you are always very upfront about what you're doing. You're always asking for consent. And at the end of the day, these techniques only work because I'm not trying to copy and paste anything out of me into you. I'm not trying to take my reasoning and make you live by it.
So it's not about the content of the belief that you want to change. It's about getting me to reflect on why and how I got there.
I'm trying to open up a space, hold it, and respectfully, non-judgmentally discuss an issue with you so that you can explore your own reasoning process and maybe even go deeper than that and explore what is my epistemological framework. We never have to say the word epistemology in the conversation, but that's what's going to happen. You're going to notice, how am I drawing my conclusions? Like, are my methods sound? That's going to come to you naturally in the conversation. And I have to be okay with, maybe I'm wrong. Like, if my goal in this conversation is to do that, you might reveal things to me that cause me to see the issue differently. And I might notice my epistemology is odd, because what we're doing is just trying to hold space to explore our reasoning together. Right. And if your goal at the end of the day is, I'm trying to believe things that are true, this is the way to wonder if we're using the methods to go there. If your other goal is perhaps, I'm trying to reduce harm in the world, then one of the things that's going to happen up front is, I need to define for you what I believe is harm. You define for me what you believe is harm. I need to tell you, I think this may be causing harm, and you have to tell me, I don't know if I say. And now we're having a discussion about something that isn't necessarily trying to win or lose something. We're trying to get to the bottom of something. Right. It's totally different, and no one's agency has to be at stake in that.
So I'm hearing you say it's about trust, it's about defining terms, it's about listening. But I can't help wondering that those are all things that we've known about for forever, right? Sure. So how is it that we have not stumbled upon these principles before, or have we maybe?
I think we have. I mean, philosophically speaking, this goes all the way back to the first things we have records of.
Socrates.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I told you the umbrella term technique rebuttal. The topic rebuttal is imagining that you're only going to trade in facts and evidence. That's topic rebuttal. Like, here are my facts, here are your facts. Let's see how they work against each other, which is great. That's if you're both playing by the same rules. That's how a lot of academia and medicine works. Technique rebuttal, however, is let's explore each other's reasoning. There's a different way of going about doing it. The umbrella term technique rebuttal includes deep canvassing, street epistemology, motivational interviewing, and the Socratic method is a form of technique rebuttal. So it's old. It's also, we invented, this is a technique that you have to, it's almost like a pilot's checklist. Like, we have a natural inclination to this, but we have to be encouraged toward it. Mm-hmm. And psychologically speaking, we have to be aware of what are people's motivations. We can get into a situation where accuracy is not our primary goal. Our primary goal is belonging. And most of the time as social primates, we find ourselves in situations where belonging is more important. And that's what leads people off of the path of having this kind of conversational dynamic, because it threatens their belonging. Right. So you have to add that to the mix. A lot of these techniques, what they do is they add that up front. I want you to know up front, there's no chance you're going to be ostracized. Mm-hmm. There's no chance I'm going to shame you in this conversation.
I'm just wondering about the dress. The dress example was really prominent, but the dress example also shows that people have differences that cannot be bridged and that are sort of innate, right? Or depend on your age. I was really happy to see the Crocs in white, though.
Yeah, I'm really not sure what that says about us, because I saw them in pink. So I'm.
But if you use that parallel, right, then the conclusion must also be that with respect to opinions or beliefs, there are some differences in beliefs that will probably be unbridgeable.
Yeah, but I don't have a problem with that, because the space in which they're unbridgeable is not the space I want to stay in. I want to go in the space above that, or below, depending on how you like metaphors.
But how do you get people who are stuck in a debate to get above that stage?
Like, this reminds me, Celeste Kidd, she's a cognitive neuroscientist. I spoke to her just the other day, and she did this bizarre set of studies about whether or not two people are thinking the same thing when they use the same word. And she came to a hard bit of evidence that the likelihood that when I say penguin and you say penguin, or if we both see a penguin, mm-hmm. we say, hey, penguin. I hope I've said that enough. You have penguin in your head. The likelihood that when the word penguin appears that both of us imagine the same thing is about 11%.
Yeah.
It's about 11%.
Yeah.
And a lot of these techniques do that, where they how do you define this? How do I define this? So it's already built into the system that all of our subjective realities have overlap, but that overlap may be narrow in a lot of domains. Yeah. And the idea here is to simply reveal that to each other in a way that's safe and communally agreed upon, and we both have the same goal in mind. And that's really what you're trying to do, is establish, would you mind joining me in a attempt to arrive at either the truth or a better world, whatever that means, and so on. And that way, it doesn't matter if it's impossible for me to show you that the dress is a different color. it's important that we both know that's true. And so how do we live in a world where that's true, and it's a world that we both can live with?
Well, yeah, don't dig your heels in the sand. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. That helps, thanks.
Yeah, we solved everything. We're good.